What's good, thugs? By popular demand, I'm actually going to be showing the editing process for a fan favorite photo. It popped off pretty good. One of my local photographer friends even asked me, and he's got way more followers than me, and he said, "How did you do this?" So I figured this might be a good example photo for a before and after editing process. It's got masking, a bunch of tools, cropping, so it's a pretty good example. This is my buddy John's NA Miata and my friend Nat. She's the model. Here's both of their Instagrams. Give them a follow. They did a great job. So first things first, this is the raw photo. I shoot on a Canon R8. This was taken at ISO 200, 50 mil. It's a full frame at f1.8. I just do that because it was kind of dark. I love wide open with a lot of bokeh at 1/200. I don't go under 1/200. I got shaky hands. You know how it is. First thing I want you to notice is right now my histogram. A lot of people always shoot for a dead even histogram. I am not one of those. If I take my exposure slider right here and I want to bring that to the middle, I'm going to be honest, it's kind of underexposed. I kind of like to shoot to the vibe that I am kind of working with. So before this, I took pictures of all of my settings. So I'm going to go through and kind of duplicate the settings that I did make to the photo so that you can kind of see it happen one thing at a time. What we're going to do first is I'm going to crop it. A lot of people freak out when it comes to cropping, when it comes to subject placement, things. I keep it very simple. I center all of my subjects. One tool I've found that I love is this angle straighten tool. So if you use this, you can click on a reference point, and then you could drag, and it's going to center it to that. So you can see I'm using this little marker on the light right here, and I'm just going to straighten it like that. Next thing I'm doing is I'm going to hold down Alt, which will allow it to focus on the center point when I make cropping adjustments, and I'm going to pick a reference point, and I'm going to center it. So I'm going to do the edge of that marker light to the other edge of the marker light. Now I know that the car is perfectly centered and level. So you can see this photo was taken at 6300 plus 3 on my white balance. I had it set to 6185, which made it a little tiny bit cooler. And I also went a little toward the green side. You can see I'm at plus 3 right now, but I had the photo at minus 5. Makes a small difference. The before and after, you can see more. When I edited the photo, I brought the exposure up a little bit, 1.19. So it definitely shifted a little more toward the center, but not too much. One thing that I really don't like, and I think it's kind of more focused on my editing style as opposed to like a rule when it comes to anything like that in photography, is I'm not a fan of slamming your highlights down and raising the shadows and boosting clarity. Because you can see is when I drop the highlights down, you can see more in the trees and more around here, and if I lift the shadows, it shows more in the bumper and the darker areas of the trees. I think it gives a really flat look. When I edited this photo, I actually kind of did the opposite. So I brought my highlights up to 22 and I dropped my shadows down to 25. So you can see already it's having a much higher contrast, kind of emotional look, and it's enriching those blacks a little bit. And then I took it to an even further extreme with a plus 44 on the white and then a negative 23 on the black slider. So you can see now it's even higher contrast. It will make more sense later. Presence, I don't usually mess with too much. I used to use it a lot more before I got my Pro Mist filter, but I've kind of been shifting back to using it. I like the softer vibe in photos, so I did a negative 5 on the clarity, and I dropped my dehaze down to negative 10 too. Usually I'll do a negative 5 or negative 10, sometimes negative 5 on both, sometimes negative 10 on both. My colors, vibrance and saturation, I treat oppositely. I never will do just one without the other. I will never do them in the same direction. In this example, I did a negative 74 on the vibrance, which you can see dulled the photo down a lot, but I compensated with a plus 77 on the saturation. So you can see high concentrated areas are duller, like the bodysuit as well as the car, but areas with a lot of contrasting colors like the greens in the grass as well as the green of the leaves are more vibrant. Now the photo looks really high contrast right now, but I took care of that with the S curve on my tone curve. For this one, I lifted the blacks a little bit. I don't have an exact value, but I lifted them to about here. Now this one you can see is output 11. So you can see right here in the really dark areas, it lifted the shadows. So this isn't a pure black anymore. Now it's kind of a lifted black, and you can see it brings out a little bit more tone in that dark areas. I didn't adjust my peaking on the lights, Now here I lifted that to a traditional S-curve, but I dropped this down pretty harsh. So you can see I'm still really focusing on the contrast in this scene. Now one setting area that I mess with a lot that I think is completely underrated is the calibration. Calibration makes a very big difference compared to your HSL sliders. So where, your HSL sliders, you are focusing on a certain threshold from a visual color, but the calibration is affecting the hue of the pixel itself. So it's going to affect the whole image and not just focused sections of it. So what I did for this photo is I had my shadow tint plus 10. You can see it made the shadows a tiny bit more purple. I think it balanced out the negative on the tint on the white balance a little bit more, so that kind of brings it back to a neutral black zone. For the red primary, I went with a negative 19. You see it didn't do too much, but you can kind of see it over there in the fence and in the greenery. Now being on the pink side of the hue, I dropped my saturation down to negative 32 as well. So you can see it dulled down those leaves a little bit, made them kind of less obstructive and visually dominant. Green primary, I didn't touch the saturation, but I did slide the hue to negative 26. Now going into this photo, I did want to emphasize the fall look since this was a Halloween themed shoot. So I'm trying to shift the greens and kind of other cooler colors more towards warmer tones, and you'll really see it with the blue primary. This is a slider I use to get the fall look in most of my non-fall photos. If I put this in negative 55, you're going to see it instantly shifts all those greens to a nice orange color. And now that I have the orange leaves that I want, as well as so nice neutral dark and black shadows with orange leaves and greenery, I boosted the saturation for the blue primary up to plus 24, so you can see that made a world's difference. Color mixer, I handle pretty simply. I don't go through and mess with colors that I don't need to. I'll kind of shift things after I do my calibration to tune it in a little bit more towards what I'm looking for. In this case, my reds, I shifted up plus 27. You can see most of the difference that made in the pumpkin before. It's got a little bit of that red tone at the bottom, but now it kind of balanced out that orange, and I dropped the saturation negative 24, so it was a little bit less dominant. Now the orange hue shift was pretty subtle. I did a plus 6 on the hue shift toward the yellow side, but I did drop the saturation down negative 30 to again make these colors a tad bit less dominant. But now that they look kind of faded and washed out, I dropped the luminance a little bit to kind of make them darker. Now it looks a little funky on the pumpkin, but that's just kind of one of those things that you don't look at too hard and everything will be okay. The yellows were definitely a more dramatic shift because that's going to have more of the effect on the leaves. You can see right here that these are definitely more on the yellow half than the orange half, so adjusting these is going to make more of a difference on the leaves, which is what I was going for, and why I brought them so far to the left on the orange side to negative 54. So now you can see you really get that orange look on those leaves that I was going for. And again, to emphasize that orange fall look, I did a plus 42 on the saturation, and I did not touch the luminance. Again, you can see makes a big difference, and it kind of solidifies the color theme that you have in this photo. Now, it's kind of extreme, but one way I do like to handle my greenery is to pick one color, because if 90% of photos that you're having with any foliage, you adjust your yellows and your greens to really hone in that color on them, because they are going to be separate. Now, because I put so much emphasis on adjusting the yellow tones, when I edited this photo, I dropped the saturation on my greens completely. I had them completely grayed out. There's no greenery anymore. It's just all focused on that yellow, warm, orangish tones in the fall leaves. Aqua, blue, purple, and magenta, didn't touch them. Didn't need to. They're not present in the photo. They're not causing any distractions. It's not in windshield reflections or anything like that. So I didn't need to do anything to them. Now it is a warm photo, and the color grading, I did have some subtle adjustments, but I think they made a big difference on the final vibe of the photo. Typically I like to have cooler shadows and warmer highlights. In this case, I had 181 on my hue, which you can see is over in that blue kind of turquoise area, but my saturation was only 2. Now you can kind of already see a difference that makes here in the shadows. Very, very, very subtle, but it balances out that purple a little bit. Blending, I never really kind of leave this factory. Usually I will slide it over because it smooths out that gradient a little more. In this case, for my shadows, I just put my blending to 100. Midtones, I did not do anything to the midtones, but the highlights, I did adjust the highlights and give them a little bit of a warmer tone. This was hue 31. You can see is orange right there between the yellow and the red. And then the saturation was plus 15. I bumped it up definitely a lot, and I did not adjust the luminance. So you can kind of see the big difference right in here with the warmer orange tones, but the cooler shadows over here. This spot on the glass makes it it demonstrates it pretty well. Or you could look here on the bodysuit versus here on the bodysuit where there's a reflection. You can see the cooler tones in the shadows as well as the warmer highlights. Lens corrections, typically I do those manually. The only thing I'm doing is either defringe if I notice that there's some chromatic aberrations on on light or white areas. But vignetting, I usually am sliding that up very frequently. I'll just type in plus 30. You can see it offsets that natural vignette that the lens gives with the 50mm. Now, my absolute favorite feature in Lightroom is the denoise feature. The AI denoise is insane and literally life-changing. I would go as far as to say life-changing. You can see it right here in the windshield and in the bodysuit. As soon as I kick on that denoise, you can immediately see a difference in the windshield with the denoise on versus the denoise off. It's insane. The sharpness is crazy. It makes the picture look way more balanced, but really it keeps all of the detail. It really doesn't get rid of anything. I don't know how it works so good, but it works so good. Now masking. Everybody freaks out over masking. Totally understandable. I don't do super crazy subject masking or anything of the sorts. Usually I just focus on a shadow mask and a highlight mask. My shadow mask, I'll just drag in from the bottom to focus the eye more toward the subject, and I'll drop the exposure just a tiny bit. Now, just for the vibe and the editing style that I really like blown out softened whites, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it, make it real big and real soft, and I don't need to touch any of my exposure. I'm just going to take my dehaze and bring it all the way back. And you're going to see it really just kind of blows out that white, but kind of gives it that soft, dreamy look too. I made some subtle adjustments to the S-curve to try and closely, match it to the original photo that we were going off of, and I also kind of slid the values on the masks around as well as the mask positions a little bit, just to make them closer to the original image. But you can see with the before and after, since I didn't copy and paste the crop directly, they're pretty similar. That's kind of how I, get those deep, rich blacks, as well as having nice contrast, and really just putting my style into these photos, especially when you compare it to the before and after. I think it gives that perfect fall effect, and I don't know, it's an image. I really like it. Definitely one of the better portraits I've done. I don't do portraits often, and I don't know. Let me know what you think.